Hello, everyone. My name is Rathore.
And my name is Isabel Hook. And today we'll be talking about shifting identities, teacher, advisor, and flipped teacher. So we'll go through a few topics today. We'll start with the context and a literature review to tell us a little bit more about the space we're working in and how we've researched this. Then CD will go through the methodology and discuss that a little bit more. And then together we'll do some findings and discussion and eventually a conclusion.
So let us first introduce you to the context of this research. Both of us are working at a self-access center of a university. I joined the self-access center last year, and Isabel started teaching this year. And this presentation is essentially our shared experience in adjusting from being teachers to working at a self-access center. So first, we are going to introduce ourselves and the space to you. As I mentioned, my name is Singh Rathore. I also go by CD. I'm from India. I have been teaching for about a little more than 5 years, 1 year part-time and about 4.5 years at the university level. My involvement with self-access centers has been for the past 7.5 years, which includes a variety of positions from student staff in a conversation center to partial involvement as an advisor, and then to complete involvement as an advisor and manager of a self-access center.
My name is Isabel Hook. I'm from Australia. I have about 10 years or 9 to 10 years of teaching experience, 4 of which were in South Korea, then in Australia for a while, and now about 4 to 5 years in Japan. But I've only been working in the self-access center for the last 6 months, and this is my first full year that I'll be completing at the end of this year. So the Self-Access Learning Center that we're talking about today is called eSpace. So we'll be using that term interchangeably throughout. It's within the Department of English for Global Communication at Konan Women's University in Hyogo in Japan. We have a wide range of materials, movies, books, computers, magazines, quite a large space to use. We offer peer-to-peer and one-to-one with teacher speaking opportunities, lots of different programs. An important element is our student staff, both working in the main space and also in the English Cafe, which is the peer-to-peer speaking space. We have integrated classes and reward programs that are used throughout this university, so not just the English for Global Communication department, but in other departments as well. And we also run workshops, events, presentations, things for holidays, and fun things like that. So we consider ourselves staff of the eSpace, but that composes of many different roles that we play. We're an advisor. We do direct study advising for students. We are a manager both of the space and of the student staff that we have available to us. We both have we are teachers in classes as well. So we have a tutoring class, which is an integrated lesson that all first year students must take. And we also work with speaking one-to-one with students, both formally and informally in the space, outside of the space, and through one-to-one booked time with the teachers.
So let's look at some of the literature on the main themes of our research. The first important theme is, of course, teacher identity. As a lot of we understand, it is a dynamic and constantly evolving concept, and it leads to a lot of identity shifts within the person. Another important thing is that it includes not only the person, but also the context in which they are working and teaching. It is multifaceted. It is a lot of sub-identities within the larger concept of teacher identity. It's affected by both internal factors, such as emotions, as well as external factors, such as a new job or life experiences. And finally, and perhaps quite importantly, identity and agency are inseparable, and each of them affects the other.
So when we talk about self-access centers, we're talking about based around the factor of an autonomous learner. So learner autonomy comprises of a student who has willingness and ability to control how they learn, what they learn, how they participate in language learning opportunities, and also has a level of self-awareness about their own study process, as well as motivation to improve their studies. When an autonomous learner starts accessing materials, we call that self-access learning, and that can be engaging with materials outside of a teacher-led environment. It can also be pushing boundaries within a teacher-led environment, accessing more materials or resources to be able to do things which are teacher-led. And it also means exploring a variety of different methods of learning and activities and materials. So this self-access learning often happens within a self-access center. So a self-access center can be digital or a physical space. It can often comprise of both. It provides resources and services of all different types and can be used for students as their self-access learning, or it can be used by teachers within the institution as well. So I think this is a great quote. Advising in language learning is an intentional dialogue whose aim is for the learner to be able to reflect deeply, make connections, and take responsibility for his or her language learning. So one of the roles that we can fulfill are as a study advisor or a language learning advisor. We help students understand their own learning process. And although the term is advising or advisor, we don't like to actually dictate how a student would do their studies or how they would complete an activity, how they would develop their learning. Instead, we prefer to take a step back and let the student reflect on their own learning process, what has worked for them in the past, what hasn't worked, what they would like to further, and just direct them to resources that are available, or maybe guide them in that conversation to help them understand themselves a little better. If we take too much control within these advising sessions, then we run the risk of reducing the learner's autonomy and reducing their belief in their own ability to teach themselves.
Now let's look at the methodology of this research. The primary methodology used was Duoethnography. This is a methodology that's recently gaining a lot of popularity, specifically in the English language teaching field in Japan. There is a small but dedicated group of researchers who are doing a lot of work on and using this methodology. So what is Duoethnography? Duoethnography is essentially a collaborative, qualitative research methodology, and the main focus is the juxtaposition of two sets of experiences to expose and explore the contrast and the similarities, the connections between these two experiences. In the case of our research, of course, it was Isabel and my experiences working in this self-access center and transitioning from classroom teachers to self-access advisors and managers. We choose a certain issue, in this case, teacher identity, and that issue is explored through dialogue on the various backgrounds, beliefs, and behavior patterns. So essentially, this is what the process or procedure of a duoethnography looks like. First, the participants decide on a topic, and not all of them, but some participants choose to come up with some prompts or questions. In our case, yes, we did come up with some questions to discuss in our dialogue. Then the dialogues are recorded. Usually it happens over multiple sessions. Today we will be presenting the first section of our duoethnographic project. So we'll be focusing on our first dialogue. Then once the dialogues are recorded and transcribed, the two participants get together and identify the major themes. And based on those themes, similarities and differences are explored. And finally, what's unique about duoethnography is it encourages you to create fictional dialogues from the transcripts so that the material becomes accessible. The first important thing is it's accessible to the person who's reading it. And secondly, it's easier to focus on the main points of interest of the research. So that was the procedure that we followed as well. And here are the questions that we came up with. I will not read them. I will give you some time to go through them by yourselves. Essentially, these questions began with our teaching beliefs and why did we choose to apply for this position in the first place. And then once we got this position, what were the challenges we faced? What was the process of transition? And has this transition in our identity affected our classroom behavior? Because we continue to teach in the classroom as well. And then if we felt there were any differences in these multiple identities or not. Now let's look at the findings and let's discuss them.
So there are a couple of themes that came up throughout our discussions. The first one being about our beliefs and experience. There are a lot of similarities in our beliefs, but quite a few differences in our experiences tended to be the theme with that one. Finding our feet. So we were both quite new to this field. CD has about a year's worth more experience than I do, but we both went through this change of moving into the space and moving into this role, and remember that quite keenly. And this transition in our identity is something that we explored a lot. We also talked about the impact on classroom behaviours and how our transition in identity has affected how we behave in classes and how we relate to students. And also the idea of a flipped teacher, which we'll go into a little bit more as we talk more. So for similarities in our beliefs and experiences, as I said, we both come from student-led classrooms. We both enjoy classes where we develop a sense of community and collaboration between students. And we are also quite needs-based in our teaching, in that we listen to what students need through dialogue with them, through evidence in their output through the classes, and we try to adjust our teaching to adapt to what they require from us.
While our teaching beliefs were quite similar, the primary difference was in our familiarity with self-access centers. As we mentioned previously, in my case, my journey in English education began with self-access centers. So it's been about 7 years. And Isabel entered self-access center after joining the position this year. There were also some concerns and challenges that we had while applying for this position and after getting it as well. The similarities in our concerns and challenges were firstly in the difficulty in understanding the job profile. While we had applied for this position, we were still unable to visualize what a day in this position would look like. So what were the little small tasks that a person who's an advisor and manager at a self-access center does? Secondly, while we were to a certain extent familiar with theories on learner autonomy and self-access learning, we were still a little unsure about how does that theory manifest itself in day-to-day practice. And finally, we did have some concern about clashing identities. At that point of time, we had a solidified identity as a teacher, and we were concerned how the many identities of teacher, advisor, and manager would interact and potentially clash with each other.
So as far as differences are concerned, as we discussed, CD had a lot more self-doubt about his qualifications and whether he would be qualified enough to be an advisor in a self-access center. And that may have come from his experience and exposure with them. He had a deeper understanding of what the spaces were, how advisors moved within those spaces, and what was required of them. Seeing as I had very little to no experience with the self-access learning, with a self-access center, but prior to coming into the position, I think I had a false sense of confidence and didn't really understand what was going to be needed from me. Of course, there was a difference in familiarity with self-access centers, but also with working within a faculty at a university. So CD has a lot more, and still had a lot more familiarity with hierarchy within Japanese systems, what positions sort of meant what, and how those positions moved between each other. There was a lot of concern from CD regarding being viewed as a faculty member instead of as a staff member. Faculty members and staff members hold different roles and hold different positions in the eyes of other faculty members. And so how we would be perceived by the department, how would be perceived by other teachers was of greater concern for CD, also because he had a bit more awareness of it.
Yes, just to add to that, my primary concern was that I wanted to retain my identity as a teaching faculty member, as opposed to being viewed as a non-teaching staff member. And, in one of the follow-up discussions, we were thinking that this concept of self-doubt and self-assurance could be a product of our different cultures as well.
Okay, so transition in identity. We both experienced quite a large and meaningful transition within our identities as teachers and advisors, and just who we are as people as well. For both of us, it took quite a while to transition into the new role. I've only been in it about 6 months, and so I'm still transitioning a lot myself. And it took at least a couple of months to get comfortable in what I was doing day to day, same as heard for CD. And it has taken many more months to then specialize in my skills and understand where I needed to develop and what I was doing and how it was affecting students. So the size and the scale was also quite similar, even though we both come from students, we both preferred student-led classrooms previously. There was quite a shift in our identity coming into a self-access center. And perhaps because we get along quite well, we have quite similar personalities. And also because CD is sort of leading the 2-person team, but we do seem to be transitioning in the same direction as each other. So we often have very, very similar goals, very, very similar thoughts and ideas about different issues that come up. And it has helped working in the space together as well.
Yeah. But there were also differences. We mentioned about this before, and the primary difference was in the feeling of being self-assured or self-doubting. In my case, before entering this position, I had attended a few conferences and professional development opportunities in which I had seen the experts in the field of learner advising. And so I felt a bit underconfident, and I doubted myself when I was taking on this position full time. And in case of Isabel, as she mentioned, she felt much more comfortable and confident in taking this opportunity. As she mentioned, by default, I'm the lead in the team because I've been here for a little while longer. And so there was this difference in who was the influencer and who was the influencee. So that was another difference in terms of our transition into identity. I transitioned more into a team leader identity and was helping welcome Isabel in the smoothest way possible and train her for this position. And in connection to that were our roles and responsibilities. I was more on the training, supporting, and making certain major decisions for the Self-Access Center. And Isabel was slowly figuring it out because it was her first semester. And now we are getting there. So those were the main differences. In terms of behaviors and relationships, there were some similarities. The primary similarity was that we were bringing our new advisor identity into the classroom. And this was manifested in multiple ways. One of them was SAC integration. We were encouraging our students to visit the Self-Access Center to make use of it. So that was one. The second one was the way we were relating one-on-one with our students changed, because often in the classroom, the students are viewed as a collective, as a group. Of course, there are certain individual people who stand out, but it's not every single person. But after spending long periods of time with them in their advising sessions, observing their behavior in the Self-Access Center, we started relating to students one-on-one, and they started responding as well. And then there was this concept of personal boundaries, not only with regard to our classroom students and them coming for our advising sessions, but also interacting with the student staff in the Self-Access Center. We were spending a lot of time together, and we were having a lot of small talk and day-to-day conversations, which helps for the relationship to become friendly. But at the same time, we were also their supervisors at work. So this negotiating of boundaries was also something both of us not struggled with, but this was another thing to process and think about.
Mm-hmm. So within the classroom, CD being more familiar with Japanese language, Japanese culture, Japanese hierarchy within universities, workspaces, classrooms, things like that. That is a much more defined aspect of his classes. And he's spoken a little bit about being more comfortable using Japanese when needed in the classroom, about referring back to these Japanese systems that were much more familiar to students and to CD, whereas I'm not as familiar with them. And so the way that we were relating one-on-one with students and the way that we were relating to our classes as a whole was a little bit different, even though we both had major shifts in that relationship. There's also obvious variables, culture and gender, and that made a big difference with how we set those personal boundaries. Konan Women's University is a women's university, and so that majorly affected how we were relating to students and how students were relating to us and how they wished to relate to us. And so setting those boundaries was a thing that was slightly different for both of us. And as it should be, everyone's got different personal boundaries, but it was definitely affected by those variables.
And in our discussions after our dialogue together, something that really came to the forefront was this concept of flipped teachers. And Isabel brought it up, and she borrowed from the concept of a flipped classroom. And we kind of realized that through this shifting of identities from teacher to advisor to manager back to teacher, we had become flipped teachers, in the sense that the classroom was no longer a watertight compartment, primarily because we were having so many interactions with our students in the Self-Access Center and in advising sessions. And those interactions were informing our behavior and our relationship with our students within the classroom.
As a flipped teacher, we were also able to develop these trust cycles. So as students were relating to us in different and more personalized way, we were receiving that and responding back to them in certain ways. They built trust in how we would receive them. And so their trust meant that as we were doing these reflective and self-reflective activities with them, they built more trust in their own abilities. And that circled back around to them seeing those fantastic effects on themselves. And so they would trust us even more. And so it became this momentum or motion that built up with a trust cycle. We still maintained authority, but as a guide rather than an expert. So as we were not providing students with particular answers or particular strict rules that they should be doing, instead guiding them towards things that might be helpful according to their self-reflections, they viewed us as an authority who could guide rather than as an authority who knew the answers. And also, we are sparking these self-reflective cycles, which allow students to explore their own autonomy much more deeply, and that we are able to hint them in a right direction, or just to start that cycle where it may not have existed before, where they weren't able to see themselves autonomously. So part of the discussion that we had was about how these aspects and these themes could affect us going on into the future, and how these conversations could affect us into the future. And for me, as a new person in the space, it definitely helped me to define the aims and objectives, both of the space, of CD's aims and objectives, and of developing my own personal ones as well. It gave a lot more clarification to roles. And because we do wear so many different hats in this space, being able to say, okay, this task or activity or this requirement falls under this category, I can understand it a lot better. And I can understand that I'm still developing an identity in those different spaces, in those different roles. It also meant a much better balance and provides for a much better balance throughout our workday, and allows us to allocate time to certain skills, that doing something is not meaningless or time wasting. It's just another hat that I'm wearing at that time. For example, our student staff often wish to engage with us a lot, talking to us about their day, about their week, about their weekends, and recognizing that that isn't wasted time or free time for myself. That is when I'm fulfilling the role of a mentor, fulfilling the role of a conversationalist, fulfilling the role of a manager, and that is really vital for the student staff. And then that bleeds into how the student staff relate to students who are coming into the space as well, and it spreads out from there. It also provided better communication with students and myself. If I understood what my role was, they could understand what I was doing. It allows us to relate better to peers, such as other self-access centered advisors, teachers within the space, other academics, and also lets us communicate better with administration. If we're better able to describe what we're doing and justify why we're doing certain things, why we're spending budgets in certain ways, having that clear path and clear discussions to make sure we're on the same page allows us to do that in a much more clear and strong way.
The other aspect, the other side to this coin, was the onboarding. I was on the side that was welcoming Isabel into the position and supporting her and setting her to succeed. Some of the things that emerged on this particular topic were that it's important to discuss the perceptions and expectations of both the parties involved, the side that is welcoming and the side that is joining as well. That should be the first step of training somebody for such a position. And then introducing the various identities that one has to have in this position, and then developing all of those identities is important. And so is training the specific skills that are required for each of these identities as a teacher, as a manager, as a supervisor, as an advisor. And finally, the key role that reflective practice can play in this journey of onboarding is quite important. Earlier in the semester, we would have weekly meetings, which were not just discussing the tasks that need to be done, but it was a much more reflective practice approach to those discussions. And as the semester progressed and changed, the frequency of those meetings went down, but we are still at it. And that is what inspired us to do this project together.
So in looking forwards into the future, there are a lot of things that these discussions have made clear to us. Some is that there is a need for better training and onboarding programs. As we both said, coming into the position, it was a little unclear what we were meant to be doing. I remember prior to starting asking the previous teacher who I was taking over from, like, what will my day look like? What will I be doing every day? And there was not ever a really clear answer. I don't think there's an excellently clear answer now, but at least I know why there is no answer for that. It also means that we can develop our skills more closely with the different identities that we have, that we can do research, we can discuss about these different identities and be able to work through any issues that we may be having and become more closer to an expert on those topics. And it also means that a reflective practice is becoming a vital part of what we do, both for ourselves and reflecting with each other, means that we're often on board together as well.
One of the key implications of this project, this particular presentation, but also the next sessions that we will have in our Duoethnographic project, is that we are hoping to be able to create better training and onboarding programs. Both of us next year would be having to do that. Isabel, would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so starting at the beginning of the school term next year, I'll be moving into a different university and starting a self-access center there instead of working here. So I'll be moving away from CD. We'll be doing separate self-access centers at that point. And though the self-access center at the place I'm going to has been running for a few years, there has been nobody who has been running it exclusively. It's just been more a space that's been made available to students rather than having any driving force behind it. So observing CD's leadership within this space has definitely affected how I will be bringing those skills into the new space, and also means that I have the confidence and the self-assuredness that I'll be able to do those things and be able to set up those systems and get those things running that need to be done there.
And by extension, I would be having to welcome another colleague next year who would be stepping in Isabel's position. So, so this project and our discussions will hopefully inform and help me to fine-tune and improve on this process of helping somebody with the onboarding process. So that's about it for our presentation. Thank you so much for watching our video. This is a flipped presentation by flipped teachers, and we look forward to interacting with you in the live part of the conference. Thank you so much. See you there.
Thank you.